Now, some common misconceptions about labeling and indeed even about exporting to the U.S. There is no licensing. There is no approval process for food and beverage labels. There's not a department at FDA where you send in your label for their approval. How it works instead is you are expected to read through the regulations and then design your label to meet those regulations, and your product even to meet those regulations. FDA will then randomly or through target inspections check your product labeling when it arrives into the port of entry. But again, there is no actual approval. You don't submit your label to FDA to have it reviewed and approved. Other misconceptions, barcodes. Barcodes are not required by FDA to be on your product. Barcodes are a customer-driven requirement. Most customers want to see the UPC or barcode on a product because it helps them with inventory control, and it also helps with other things such as even checking out the product at the store level when they're selling the product. Same with lot numbers. FDA doesn't require lot numbers on your product. However, you would be wise to include lot numbers because if you ever do need to recall product, you have some problem, you're going to want to be able to isolate specific lots within your shipment. Expiration dates. Expiration dates are also not required by FDA. FDA's position on expiration dates is that products can change depending on how they are warehoused, how they are stored, how they are shipped. So an expiration date can mislead a consumer. There are guidelines on best before for certain products that you are wise to incorporate into your labeling, and typically buyers will want to see some sort of expiration dates, but again, they're not regulated with specific months or dates by FDA. Lastly, on labeling, I will say that labeling compliance does not just stop with your label. FDA actively reviews companies' websites, printed material, and other resources that they have. We see companies very frequently perhaps producing a dietary supplement, and their packaging will be perfect, but on their website or in their printed material where they're allowing people to order product, they make all types of health claims which are not permitted by FDA. FDA will typically issue a warning letter to those companies telling them that they need to cease and desist with those health claims unless they can substantiate them or go through the process of a new drug application. Could be a situation that a company might encounter. The bottom label is a corrected one which has everything that would meet FDA requirements. So even though you think your label might look perfect to you, it's very likely that there are some issues with it, and you would be wise to make sure that you correct those before shipping to the U.S. Now I'll talk about a couple other requirements. If you produce a canned, bottled, jarred, or a product in a Tetra Pak, for example, a low-acid or acidified canned food, there are very specific regulations on these types of products. FDA has a separate registration requirement for low-acid or acidified canned food or product that is thermally processed. You'll have to register your factory, and you also have to submit to FDA something called a process filing. And that is a submission of data to FDA's Office of Low-Acid Canned Food, where scientists then review how you have indicated you actually produce that low-acid or acidified food. Because these are higher risk items, they want to actually look at how you are producing that product. HACCP, Hazard Analysis Critical Control Points. This is a food safety system that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It is currently required for exporting to the United States if you produce seafood, juice, or a meat or poultry product. So if you're producing any of those products, seafood or juices, you are required to operate under a HACCP plan. Lastly, good manufacturing practices required for all food, beverage, dietary supplements. And again, FDA's good manufacturing practices can be found in our Code of Federal Regulations, very detailed, in-depth information about GMPs. Now, what happens if your shipment is detained? What do you do? Well, firstly, you'll want to ask your customer, your importer, for evidence that it actually has been detained. And that evidence will come in the form of a document called a Notice of FDA Action, and it is typically 1, 2, or 3 pages long. It will be issued by FDA, and it will be sent to 2 parties and only 2 parties. It will be sent to the U.S. importer of record, your customer, and it'll be sent to their customs broker. So if you get a phone call from your buyer in the United States and they say, bad news, the shipment has arrived but it's been detained by FDA because of labeling or because of you're not registered or whatever the case might be, the first thing you want to do is ask your customer for a copy of the Notice of Action. This Notice of Action will explain the precise reason that FDA has detained your shipment. It will say when they detained it, where, exactly what was detained, and most importantly, it will give you the reason why it was detained, and it will ask you, or your importer I should say, to respond to FDA by a specific date. Typically, FDA will give you several weeks or even 30 days to respond to the Notice of Action. And depending on what the problem is, depending on the reason that FDA has detained your product, that will determine your response. Certain detentions will prove very difficult to resolve. If it's a quality issue, for example, if FDA has determined your product has salmonella or E. coli or listeria, you may attempt to convince FDA otherwise. That will involve testing of the product, etc. But if it's a problem such as labeling or a registration, you may be able to go to FDA, ask for an extension, and ask them for permission to fix the problem while the container is still in the port or before it has actually been shipped off to various customers. So it's very important, if you do have a problem, to try and solve it, because otherwise you will go into a database that FDA maintains, and that database is called OASIS, and I have some screenshots up there. OASIS is in essence a database where it is searchable. You can go and search by country, you can search by month, and you can search by specific product types, and you will see, what shipments FDA has detained and the reason that FDA has detained those shipments. So my point here is that if you do have a problem with FDA, you do want to try and resolve it, because the OASIS database is publicly available on the internet, and it's available for anyone to see. So that means a potential buyer here in the United States can also search the OASIS database to see if your company has had any problems in the past. Now I'll talk very quickly about voluntary programs. I mentioned earlier, here are some of the mandatory things: registration, labeling. If you produce low acid or canned food, there's a separate registration, HACCP, GMPs. What about some of the voluntary programs? There are things such as the USDA organic certification, kosher certification, halal certification, fair trade, ISO 22000, British Retail Consortium. These are not regulated by FDA. These are programs or schemes that are independent organizations. Many of them are global, except for the USDA. And anyone may go under these various schemes. And indeed, many of your buyers in the United States may ask you, are you USDA certified? Or are you certified under BRC or IFS or ISO 22000. But again, not regulated by FDA,